All right, everybody, we have another great episode for you here on Herp House Rock. We have Jason Wagner. He has some really awesome animals, some lizards and stuff he's got going on, so stay tuned for this one. Should we start calling people that watch this Herp Housers?
No. Maybe. Probably
All
not.
right.
Hold
Yes,
on.
sir. Hey.
Okay. Sorry, I had to swallow. All right.
Hey,
So,
Dave, before we get started, I had a special request that I had to tell everybody that Ryan is alive and he's hoping to come back soon.
yeah, for everybody who's watching, I don't even fucking know what's going on with Ryan.
Yeah.
No one has given me any information. I'm just as confused as everybody else.
He's just busy and he has a bunch of stuff going on right now that, personal life stuff. So
Yeah,
Me and him
Jason
are
doesn't know
Ryan,
what we're talking about. Yeah, Jason, there's another guy who does this with us. He just kind of flaked out on us about 10 episodes ago, but we're hoping he comes back eventually.
yeah.
But
Definitely.
okay, let's talk about Jason. Holy shit, Ben. Okay, so cool thing about doing shows like I do, you get to run into random people on the line, and that's where I met Jason. Down in Nashville, Tennessee, his kids came over, they picked out a couple ball pythons, they got a couple of Sambos from our friend Steve, and ever since then, honestly, somebody I always look forward to seeing at the shows. So Jason, some people know your background, some people don't. Even I'm a little hazy on everything that you've done, but where did this all start for you? I do want to get into some Abronia stuff, but what kind of got you in the game? Were you an early herper as a kid? How'd you end up where you're at right now as a hobbyist?
Yeah, I call it a irresponsible hobby level. It's where I'm at. I've had every house I've had several hundred square feet of the house dedicated to reptiles, and I started when I was 6. So I started catching lizards out in the desert and stuff where my grandparents lived. There wasn't anything to do out there. And when I was 2, I blame this on my grandfather, because when I was 2, he used to read the dinosaur books to me. And I got really stuck on dinosaurs. And then, as I got a little bit older, I started realizing, hey, the dinosaurs are all around us. They're just small. And I got really excited about alligator lizards because I grew up in the Seattle area of Washington. And just in the foothills around there, we could go out and catch the northern alligator lizards. And one time I had a female, and I didn't know it was a female, and I didn't know it was gravid, but all of a sudden I had a bunch of babies. And so raised those things up, caught the little black spiders in the yard and threw them in there. And from that point on, I was really hooked, especially on lizards and alligator lizards. And now, as it turns out, anything that's a live-bearing lizard, I kind of get drawn into that. So that's really my life story outside of my wife and kids.
How old were you when you produced that litter of alligator lizards?
Yeah, I produced is a strong word. I caught a wild female that was gravid, put it in a cage, and it had babies. But yeah, I was probably, I want to say like 9 when that
9?
happened.
And did you get all those babies to live? Or most of them?
As I recall, most of them for quite a while, and then I released them because I didn't have the
super impressive.
Yeah, I didn't have the long-term vision at that point, right?
Yeah. But still, any kid that can get wild nature of any sort to live when it has babies is it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
And this is back before the cricket farms were not in existence at this point. So if you wanted to feed your lizard, you caught moths, flies, spiders, grasshoppers, beetles, all that stuff. And I did all the above. And, I was constantly throwing stuff in there, not really knowing what I was doing. But honestly, that's a pretty good thing to do. Wild caught bugs are great for lizards. So especially those that are insectivorous. Now we know those things, but back then we didn't really.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool.
I just kind of nerded my way through it. Sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
No, you're good, man. That's the only way to do it. And by the way, you can interrupt me as much as you want. You're the guest, so I don't really give a shit. And another thing that I really loved is, and Benjamin's attribute is Facebook stalking. So as we talk, he's going to Facebook stalk you a little bit.
That's going to be my treat.
Hopefully he's Facebook stalking you right now. But Jason has this amazing reptile room. And you got your center display, which I absolutely love. And you actually showed the construction on your Facebook page. Really beautiful setup. Benjamin hopefully is already in the process of looking for it. If not, we'll come back to it. But I love your setup. Honestly, I love the diversity in your collection. A bunch of stuff I don't know anything about, which always intrigues the shit out of me. So yeah, like I said, great collection. Benjamin's on it. Stalk him. Let's bring up some animals as we're talking. But okay, well, let's get right back into it because you're the Abronia guy, man. Like Abronia is, you Google Abronia, your name is going to come up. You've written a lot of articles over the years. You told me about some of the work you've done down in Mexico with farms, helping families out back when we were bringing them in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about just anything and everything Abronia, and then we'll start asking questions as we go.
Yeah, we could start there with first of all, Abronia had, ever since I was a kid in college, when I was back, let me think, this was back 1989, going back a few years. I found an old reptile book at the university I was going to, and there was a picture of an Abronia. And at the time, I didn't really know what it was, but I just knew it was an alligator lizard that was really cool colors, And I didn't even know anything about the genus at that point. I don't even think. Oh gosh, Campbell? I don't think Dr. Campbell had written his paper until 1993, kind of classifying the several species, and now they say there's 29 species that are out there. I think there's still several more that they're in the process of discovering, and I've got buddies down in Mexico. I go to Mexico quite a bit. I would say since 2006, 2005, somewhere in there. I've gone to Mexico every year, sometimes 2 or 3 times. I've done a lot of hiking through the cloud forests and explored the habitat and where several of the species occur. I haven't been to every single habitat. I'm not familiar with every single species, but yeah, you're starting to find some pictures there on
Instagram.
This is probably Instagram. Yeah, I've got some old pictures up there. So that there is Abronia Rita. I think that was 2 females. So anyway, I just became fascinated with Abronia from kind of the early 90s, and I got my first Abronia graminia back when what's his name now? Gosh, I'm drawing blanks on names. This sucks. John Otley. If anybody remembers John Otley back in the early 90s, he had an import permit from Mexico to bring in all kinds of different species, and he brought in a few graminia, and I ended up getting a male out of that group, and then eventually I did get a female, and I started working with those in the kind of the mid 90s, and then I didn't get my first Guatemalan species until 2003, and that was from a professor out in the University of Puget Sound. Guy, he kind of stays off the radar, and he prefers not to be named, but he was working with the animals, and at this time, nobody really knew what Abronia were, to be honest. There was a handful of people, and I mean literally maybe you could count them on one hand, people in the United States who had kept them or even knew what they were. They weren't in pictures. We didn't really have the internet going. There's certainly no social media back at this time, right? 2003. But that's when I started breeding Vasconcelosi, which is a species from Guatemala. And I kept them going, and I learned everything that I know today, probably in those first 10 years, just figuring out by trial and error. Because believe it or not, the very first litter that I hatched out of Vasconcelosi, I had 9 babies. I put them all in a 10-gallon tank.
Oh.
Did not know what I was doing. And I didn't have at that point, you look, today everybody does it in screen cages, right? And that's something that I came up with over time, and I figured out it's really good for them to get natural sunlight. It's really good for them to get rain, kind of a change in climate from the fall to the winter. Yeah, there you go. You see my screen cages there in the background. So I developed all these protocols over a period of many years. But when I first started out, man, I was in the business of killing little babies, which really sucked. It was heartbreaking losing those animals. I tried so many different things. I tried at one point putting them all in individual deli cups and raising them that way so that I could see them eating, because I was afraid they weren't eating, but what they really need, and now I've learned this, the babies need to be kept just like the adults in a screen cage away from each other, because they bite each other. They're territorial. They're feisty. In the wild, they're not hanging out in little groups together. They're isolated. They're solitary animals. And they need the access to the temperature, on the higher side, you want, the basking temperatures up near the top, and you want the cooler temperatures near the bottom where they can go escape out of the heat, because that's what it's like in real life for them, right? If they need to get out of the heat, they go down into the moss. And so we provide those things in a captive environment, in a screen cage, and all of that kind of comes together. And they need a variety of insects. They need good humidity, good misting, and then you'll be successful. You can keep them alive and raise them to adults that way.
If I can hop in a couple little things, I do want to add something. I'll just add them both right now. The one thing is that I think that people they don't know what the older breeders, like what the people that started all this went through to get to where we are. Like people are like, even with ball pythons, back in the same time, nobody was breeding ball pythons. They didn't think it could be done, and people had a lot of trouble, and now it's like, oh, it seems like the easiest thing in the world. With the Abronia, just there was so much that you guys didn't know and had no way to figure out. Like, it's just that you really did pave the way for people to actually keep these animals today. And it's like, I think it's a thankless job, I guess, of that, and there's tons of species and tons of people that have done that and have gone through the same. And I think that people today just don't realize what that was like, and we take it for granted.
Probably true.
And just so you know, you get one compliment an episode. That was your one compliment. It's all down here for everybody.
That was your one. So,
appreciate that.
So the other thing I wanted to bring up was, so one of the things with Abronia and some of the other, lizards that are in the same kind of idea is you have to have a really high ventilation and a high humidity. So how do you accomplish that? I've seen it done with Forrest Fanning's collection. I went and took a really good look at all that, but how do you do it for the listeners that want to get into Abronia?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a very relevant one to keep in the animals. And especially, like, I've had friends that lived in Colorado that have been able to breed them. I've had friends in Arizona that have been able to get animals to produce, but it's tricky in Arizona because it's so dry. You really have to work to keep your humidity and the heat, obviously. In the winter there, that's when you can actually keep them outside for quite a big chunk of the winter. You just gotta, here's what I do. With every new species I get, I look up where they come from. I study the habitat that they come from, the exact pinpoint location if I can, and I get a real good estimate of temperatures, highs and lows for the year, what the averages are, what the precipitation is, and then I start working backwards from that and say, here's my parameters, here's what I need to set up in the captive environment, right? So for the basking light, you can't just throw a 100-watt bulb up there. You're going to cook these things, especially if it's in a glass enclosure, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta think through those things and say, okay, well, lower wattage. If I can get the UV, now I'm seeing there's UV bulbs available that put out really good UV in the LED category, right? There's these little screw-in bulbs that are kind of a gold. They're from China. They just recently came out. You can buy them on Amazon for like $20. And I've had buddies take UVB readings on them, and they get a good reading, better than the fluorescents.
I'm dying to get into those, by the way. That would change.
Yeah, I went and bought one just to try it out. It is a little bit hard to look at, and I do worry sometimes that we're overdoing the UV stuff. I think I know with certain chameleon species, if you use too much UV and there's nowhere for them to escape it, you can blind them, right? I've heard that. I've heard about that. So you got to be careful with this UV throwing it around like we do. But and that's why I prefer natural sunlight. I do think if I can put them in a screen cage and get them outside, even if it's just for, if you're a working person, put them out there for a couple hours on a Saturday, and that alone gives them the supplementation that they might need to have the calcium absorption to do them some good beyond just always being indoors. Now, some people don't have that option, but I've at my peak, I had like 35 screen cages that I was running in and out of doors, which is ridiculous. When the weather changed and all of a sudden it went down to 45 degrees, it's like I got to get everything back inside, and set them all up with their misters and their timers. And I did that for years. So anyway, I don't want to hear anybody tell me that it's a lot of work. I know.
So, I want to talk a little bit about this UVB, UVA. So I've heard about these LEDs, and I talked to Howard Fluker a little bit on the phone about 6 months ago, and I brought that up to him, and there wasn't a whole lot of confidence in them being good enough. Like the technology, in his opinion, just wasn't quite there yet. You said your buddy took readings on it, and everything was at par with everything else you've seen?
Yeah, I forget the exact reading he was getting, but it was high enough that I was fairly shocked. I was like, wow, that's almost like what you would see in an outdoor setting. And these were LED lights. Yeah, they're LED lights that have a screw-in bulb and don't put out heat, which is important because for years, the only real option I had with Abronia was the UV bulbs that were mercury vapor bulbs. And if you get like 7 or 8 of those going in a room, forget about it. That thing becomes super hot. Yeah, there you go.
I'm on Amazon buying one right now to test it.
Yeah. Let me know. Yeah. Yeah, we had, even for the blue tongue skinks, we had talked about incorporating LEDs into our racking systems, and LED was the way I wanted to go until I somewhat got talked out of it. But yeah, even talking to a couple breeders up in Canada that work with skinks, just like you, he's shuffling like 10 or 15 animals out at a time daily through, let's say, 50 or 60 animals. So every one essentially gets a day outside, but it's a small window because, Canada, the weather, it's very hit or miss depending on what part of Canada you're in. You're not getting hot summers. So peak of the day in the spring, essentially, when the sun's beating down, he's taking his animals outside. And I think there's a lot to that. Even talking to Ryan about UV experiments with Leachianus, even though they don't need it, when they started doing experiments, these animals were thriving, doing so much better with it.
Yeah,
so,
they pop back up.
Yeah, so definitely something that, the problem is with the hobby, and we say this all the time, we figure out the bare minimal, and that's the way we do it. If it works, it works. We don't change it. But even though it's not broken, I do think there's room for improvement. Yeah.
With the blue tongue skinks, we switched over last year to all UVB and UVA, UVB, the full spectrum lights, and they seem to be doing better. We see them basking all the time in it. We put it, on one side of the cage and not on the other, and they seem to be doing well. They look healthier than they were before. I don't think that it's bad what we do with not UVB. I think it's doable. I think it's fine. But we built a rack system that we can do the UVB or the UV, light on, and it seems to be okay. I have some theories on it that I won't get into because this isn't about me, but I think that it's impressive that there's a LED light out there. It looks like a big bulb though. It's not.
It looks bigger than it is. Yeah, it's probably. Size wise, it's like, it's the top is like a regular light bulb like that, and it's flat, and then it screws into a regular light bulb fixture. So,
and so how hot is it to the touch? Is it like an LED where it's not? If you put it inside the enclosure and they touched it, would they get burned?
LEDs put off no heat. LED is just lighting. There
So-
shouldn't be any heat coming off that.
The housing, yeah, there's no radiant heat from it, but the housing itself does get a little warm. I don't know why that would be, but it does. It must be something to do with the electronics behind there. So,
Okay.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
That's an interesting thing.
yeah.
Okay, so we got
So, yeah.
sidetracked in the middle of it. You want to talk a little more about your Abronia now that we're done fucking
Yeah,
off for a second there? This happens a lot. We
Sure,
go
yeah.
through
It's awesome.
Yeah, I cut myself off. It's all right. I think I took us down that exit, but with the screen caging, the question that Benjamin had asked was about how do you provide humidity and a good ventilation.
Yeah.
And then we jumped off the tangent. So, and I don't even know that I fully answered that question, except that I would say when you're thinking about Abronia and keeping them, think about them just like a Jackson chameleon or any of these montane chameleon species, because that's the same kind of climate that they come from, right? They're high up in the trees. They do get a stiff breeze up there, so there's lots of ventilation. It's not down on the floor like with the dart frogs, right? If you put these things in a glass enclosure, you're going to have respiratory problems. It's okay to use. I like the new glass enclosures, that have the little strip of ventilation on the front and then the screen on the top. If you want to use a little fan in there, you can get away with that. But I think that ventilation is critical for their lungs, right? They're not used to sitting around breathing stagnant air all the time. So you provide that ventilation somehow, and then the thermal gradient is also important. As far as the humidity, so what I do is live plants. I've always used live plants. I've got a few. I've kind of gradually gotten to the plants that I can't kill quite as easily. I'm better at keeping lizards alive than plants for whatever reason. So pothos vines, the Schefflera, which is the kind of the umbrella plants that a lot of the chameleon keepers use. The spider plants, I like those. They got the little vines that shoot out and kind of grow pups and stuff. I don't use bromeliads anymore. I used to use them a lot because the animals came from. They've used bromeliads in the wild, but what I found is over time, keeping a bromeliad in a screen enclosure where you got usually 2 or 3 lizards in that screen enclosure, even if it's a large enclosure, they're going to be defecating in that thing. You're going to have crickets die in there, and I think the bromeliad becomes kind of a vector of pathogens. You can get coccidia, especially, that gets really bad in there. And so in the wild, what happens is you might have one lizard using 100 bromeliads, right? And he crawls around through these 100 bromeliads, and they get flushed out by rainwater, big storms. They get exposed to UV light. They're not having the same kind of conditions that we have in captivity. So I see all these people throwing bromeliads in their Abronia tanks, and I'm thinking to myself, you don't know what you're doing. Because unless you're flushing those things out regularly and exposing them to UV and limiting them, and if you can jam your tank full of like 15 bromeliads, maybe that's good. Maybe that'll work. But I've just found they become kind of a problem. So I've gotten away from bromeliads, at least for me. Now, if you're setting up a naturalistic vivarium like something like Sean Harrington does, where it's 6 feet wide and you got 50 bromeliads in there, cool. I think that would be awesome. And especially if you can stay on top of kind of flushing them out, because that is what happens in their natural habitat. But so as far as plants, I go with plants that are going to provide kind of a canopy, some shade, and different levels within the enclosure. The pothos kind of take up the lower level unless you put a little piece of wood in there where the vine can kind of travel up and grab on. And then I like those Schefflera. Like I said, they're kind of a clean, like woody stems at the bottom, and then got the little palm kind of looking tops. And they do well in the 50 to 80 degree temperatures, which is what you're trying to keep with the Abronia. So, and then just spray the heck out of those things. A daily, if you get a mister, which is what I finally had after like doing hand spraying for years. I finally broke down and set up a mister. Whoa, Dave just lit up.
Sorry, new thing I'm incorporating because everybody wants to see the face. So you keep talking.
Yeah, yeah. We weren't even sure that was you because it was just a silhouette there. You could have just put a dummy up there.
Unsolved Mysteries edition, buddy. Just boys coming from a silhouette.
So anyway, that's
how often does it fog?
So I did the misting. I had mine come on 2 times a day for a minute, which is enough to give a real good mist to the whole enclosure. And then I would use deli cups with a pinhole in the bottom and just drip water about 2 or 3 times a week. I'd take a deli cup, regular, I guess 12-ounce deli cup, fill it up maybe 3 inches, and that dripping on the plants waters the plants, and it gives them about a 20-minute window of drinking, so they can come right up to the plant and just drink as much as they need. Now that's indoors, right? Outdoors, they're getting natural rain, but I have to also make sure that between the rainstorms, they're getting enough moisture, because sometimes we'll have 5-6 days with no rain, right? And that's kind of a long time for them. Where they come from, they're getting rain, they're getting moisture just about every day almost.
Yes. Okay, so your basic setup, you recommend going with the screen cage. Let's talk about the heat gradient. What's their hot spot near the top looking like, and what are we looking at the bottom of the cage?
Yeah. So with basking, one thing to remember is in the wild, they usually come out in the morning and they'll position themselves and kind of flatten themselves out towards the sun in probably between 8 and between 7 and 10 o'clock in the morning until it gets too hot, and then they stop. They don't bask anymore. So they don't actually need to bask all day long. And if you've got a problem where your basking lights are, you got 30 basking lights in one room, you're going to get pretty hot during the day, right? When that happens. So one thing you can do is set your basking lights on a timer for 2 or 3 hours so they come on in the morning. And I like to use a 50 to 60 to 75 watt bulb somewhere in there. And I'm using the old fashioned incandescent bulbs, which are getting harder and harder to find, by the way. But I use those, and the top quarter of the screen cage, and I'll have them off to one side. So there's always this kind of warm side of the basking area. If you were to shoot that with a laser pointer, it's always going to be around 85, maybe 90 on the branches themselves. And the lizards will kind of cruise in and out of that zone. I like to do layers. So if you can do 2 or 3 branches kind of climbing themselves up into that little area in the top corner, then you've got different areas where they can kind of use all those different basking temperatures. And it helps to have like multiple spots so they're not fighting for the one spot, because they don't like to be like, despite what people might think, males and females don't necessarily want to always hang out together. They tend to want their space, right? So if you give them the kind of basking site where they can each have their own space and still get the temperature they want, that's a good thing. And then as you gradually come down in the cage, the cooler temps, you shoot the bottom of the cage where the sphagnum moss. I usually use 4 to 6 inches of sphagnum moss in the bottom of the cage and kind of have it moist, not soaking wet, but some humidity in there. Maybe off to one side it's a little dry, but the one side is all humid. That chunky moss area should be about 65 and maybe even lower, but it should be cooler. And you can reach down there with your hand and feel it and go, okay, that's a cool retreat for them. So if it gets too hot, like a day where it's 85 degrees outside and the sun is shining, most of my Abronia at that point, if it's 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the middle of the day, they're no longer basking. They're down there kind of cruising around in the shadows.
One thing that I learned about Abronia that I didn't know, that there's some of the species, they can get pretty cold. Like they do well when it gets cold. Like they can handle the cold. and I didn't.
Yeah.
I had no idea. When you get them, when they start to cool down, what's the cold that they get down to?
Yeah, it kind of freaks you out when you go to the habitat and you're outside at night and you're totally uncomfortable because of how cold it is. You realize, man, these things can take it really cold.
Yeah.
And I remember that very first time I went down to the highlands of Hidalgo, and we were looking for Abronia taeniata, and I just remember stepping outside the hotel going, I cannot believe how cold this is here. I did not bring a jacket, and I was freezing my butt off. And I think it was only it might have been 48 degrees that night, but it felt just like the humidity was still in the air, right? So it just chilled you down to the bone. So anyway, that's what they live in, right? And in fact, in all the years I've kept them, I have learned that they can take it down to 40 no problem overnight.
Yeah.
And when it gets below 40, I start bringing them in just out of a precaution but I've never had one die of cold exposure. And I've had them get down to 36 outside. So, there was a couple nights where I kind of missed getting them inside, as you can imagine. That happens. But I never had one die from cold exposure. I have had them die from heat. So if they get too hot, they don't tend to. They can get knocked off, especially babies. Babies are especially sensitive to overheating, and part of that is probably their body mass. Right, they're just smaller. There's just not much of them, so they're going to be exactly the temperature of their environment. And if they can't get out of that 85-degree temperature, they'll go downhill quick. So
yeah.
And I'm sorry, so you said with the babies, and Benjamin, you got to raise your fucking hand. So you said your baby setup is virtually the same as your adult setup. Now, are you keeping them? Now, you're doing a screen cage. I know there's large ones and smaller ones. Are you using the smaller cube-sized screen cages and individually housing those little babies? Or are you still allowing them to be in a group in those larger cages?
So over the years, I've kind of gravitated to the 16 by 16 by 30. It's a taller cage, and I like that one for 2 babies, maybe 3 babies. If I could do that size for individual babies, I would. But during baby season, you might have 30 babies. So that's too many cages. That's too much square footage for my space. So I've always just kind of got to the point where I try to separate them out 2 or 3 at a time. And for certain species like Mixteca, Taeniata, Graminia, you can actually get away with 5 or 6 babies in a cage, and they're not going to tear each other up. But with all the species that have the auricular spines, right? The Lytrachilla, Vasconcelosi, Smithy, Arita, all of those in particular, and those are the most common ones that we see in the hobby that have the auricular spines, they will kill each other. They'll straight up, if you leave them together long enough, you're going to end up with 3 or 4 animals that have killed everything else. And it's usually the males. So I've learned over the years, you got to separate them out. And it's ideal if you get them, if you think about the value of these animals, they should have their own cage, right? They're worth at least $300 or $400 on the low side, even for Lytrachilla. And on the high side with the Arita, with the Smithy, those things, it's hard to find them even now, but when they are available, they're usually $800 or $900 a piece. So I think they should have their own cage. That's my opinion. Because they just do better, and you'll have a much better survival rate. So
that's what people say. They do. They buy $1,000 animal and they say, "Let me see if I can get away with a $20 setup."
Yeah, or put a wild animal in with a long-term captive or something like that. But that animal you had there was one of my favorites. It was a Lytrachilla that I kind of nicknamed that Calico, and it's because it has that black and white spots. And if you were to look at the belly of that animal, it has the black and white spots on it.
Yeah.
To me, it reminds me a lot of a paradox, right? That what you see are some people would call it pied, right? It's like a pied gene.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is actually, and it occurs naturally in the wild there. And I think it's been prevalent in that population of animals for such a long time that there's a lot of them. So it's actually not uncommon to find those. Even in the wild. I mean, it's more common with that species to find the brown and the gray animals, but I would say maybe as much as 10 or 15% of the animals that are found in the wild are that calico version with the Lythrocilla.
Have you had the opportunity to breed that one to more of your browns or your greens from the same species to see how that works genetically yet?
No, I've always opted instead to cross calicos with calicos because I always wanted to create more of those. Or the pied, or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, I was always hoping to produce more of those types of animals. Yeah, it's another one. And I always preferred to have the animals that had a lot more red because the red looks really nice on the back, kind of the backdrop with the black and white.
I think
the variety in the species is absolutely insane. And I think last time I had a conversation about these, there was 28 species. Did the person I talked to, was he stupid, or did they just add another species in last year?
No, I think they did add another species last year, and I don't even know the name. That's how on top of it I am now. But my buddy in Veracruz that I stay with every time I go to that part of the world is Roberto Mora. He's a biologist, and they're studying right now some new species that occurs there in Veracruz that has not been described yet. So,
wow.
Is there any DNA testing going on with any of these guys breaking up species, or is it all just based on location and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, they need to do a little more DNA testing, I think, but they are doing some. There's some good scientists and good biologists down there in Mexico that are advancing the cause. And one that I'll point out, you've probably seen it over the years if you follow the Abronia forums and kind of the chats and stuff. There's the black-eyed, they call them black-eyed graminia, and then the gray-eyed graminia, or the light eyes, whatever, blue eyes. So the true form of Abronia graminia is found in Acolzingo and the mountains around Orizaba and Veracruz, in that area. Then there's another green Abronia lizard that people have called graminia for years that is actually smaller, and it has the black eyes, and it's from La Jolla, which is a good 250 kilometers north, and kind of north and west, or north and east of the nominate form of graminia. So they're not the same. They're not graminia. They should not be crossed. They should not be bred together. The one is smaller and a very distinct looking animal and does have the black or kind of the dark brown eyes. And the other, if you look at it even close up, the scales are different. Like if you zoom in on the head and take a picture, you'll see, and as a matter of fact, graminia is much more closely related to Abronia taeniata, which is kind of the black and yellow or black and white one that everybody sees. Those two, when you count the neutral scales or whatever they want to call it on the back of the neck, there's typically 4 on graminia and 6 on taeniata. But honestly, I've seen them with 5. I've seen them flip-flopped. I've seen taeniata. And my buddy, the biologist, Roberto, he had kept a couple of them together, and a graminia bred with a taeniata. They will cross. And in fact, their geographies come pretty close together. So there probably is some integrated stuff happening with those two species. But for sure, the black-eyed, quote-unquote, graminia is not Abronia graminia. It's something else. Yeah.
Interesting. Benjamin, I cut you off before. Did you have something you still want to throw out there, or is the moment gone?
No. I mean, I want to talk about I really do love Abronia. I think Ryan and I want to get into him one day. We just need to find the time and the space. But I'm looking through his Instagram, and there's a couple other things I want to talk about, but I want to keep going with Abronia for a little bit because I want to talk about the importation and what you've brought in and things like that as well. So we can go down that road if you'd like and look at this.
Yeah.
What are we looking at right here?
That's Abronia depi, and that particular animal is from an area called Valle de Bravo. So it's south and west of Mexico City, and it's actually pretty densely populated in that area. There's this particular species likes to hang out in the acacia trees, and they hang around the flowers, and a lot of bees and flies and other flying insects come in to partake in the acacia blooms, and they get nabbed by these animals. So that's how they set up, and they're not where they're from. They're not really using the bromeliads quite as much. I guess they just don't have quite as many bromeliads in that area. And I've been there. I've looked for them for several days and didn't find them. So my buddy, another buddy of mine that lives down there is a biologist, has a friend who has a piece of land, and that's where he found this animal. So they do have populations in kind of sporadic areas down there. And this one I like. Yep, my little ear thing fell out. But I like that one because it's monochromatic, right? It's all black and white, and that one has we call that one a high black animal, where it's got more black than white. And then there's another form of Abronia depi that has more of a gray head, and that one's from Michoacan, and it's a totally separate population. But yeah, as far as permits and importing and all that, it's gotten a lot more complicated now because, as you probably know, the Abronia were moved to CITES 2. So, yeah, and that's a female there, same species. And she's got a little more white on her.
A lot more white, yeah.
Yeah. So, I've raised the depi from babies to adults. They do really well. That's a good species to work with. I think my daughter just came in here.
She's been stalking you for a couple minutes, buddy. I was waiting for her to pounce over the back of the couch.
I just heard some baby noises. Like, oh, my daughter's 6 years old. She's better than any of my lizards, but.
Yeah, it looked like a little shark thing coming up on the back of your couch and going back down again for a moment there. I was waiting for something big to happen there.
It still might.
So with the importation, there was a couple years ago, there was somebody that got, I guess that they thought the Abronia should be good to come in, and came into Florida, and it was kind of a bigger story that they imported, I think, like 15 animals. Dave, maybe you heard this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like 15 animals or so, and they all got grabbed by Fish and Wildlife and got held and just told the guy, sorry, you're out of them. And I remember, I thought it was Abronia, but I'm not positive. I could be wrong. But I know there's trouble with.
I heard something about that. Yeah, I heard something about that. It was maybe 2 years ago. Does that sound right?
Something like that.
Yeah. Fish and Wildlife started cracking down on Abronia maybe 2 or 3 years ago. They just started tracking the movement and kind of the shipments that were coming in. And for sure, there's been a lot of animals that have come in undocumented. In the early days, back in 2006, right around that time frame, I started working with Roberto, my buddy down there, as a biologist. And we went through all the proper channels and proper paperwork, and it took months and thousands of dollars to do it. But we set up what they call a UMA, or an UMA. We always refer to it as an UMA, which is just an acronym. Um, and it essentially what you do is you set up a farm, right? You're establishing a farm that is sustainable down there, that produces animals, and then you can get permits to sell off some of the offspring. And they have they call it Uma Extensiva, which is one that's where you own the property and you can go out and harvest animals and then hold them and basically collect the babies and then release some of the babies and then keep some of the babies and commercialize them. And you're actually preserving the land and the habitat for that reason. So then,
Makes
and I think it's a great program because you've got plenty of areas in Mexico where the land is stripped bare, right? These things live down there. Most of these places, they have large oak trees that are sometimes 200 years old, right? That are so big you can't get your arms around them. And these things might be 150 feet tall. And if you've ever seen a really old oak tree, you know how thick and kind of gnarly they are, right? They're just huge. And these things are covered with orchids and ferns and moss and bromeliads, and they're actually amazing, right? It's like if you've never seen a old growth oak tree in a cloud forest, you're missing out. It's something to see. It's kind of like the closest thing I could say is like in the coral reefs. I've done a lot of snorkeling in my day, and I always love seeing a really pristine coral reef that's full of life, right? So that's something that to me the old oak trees remind me of that. And they're just full of life, and there's lots of insects and birds, and the Abronia right there. And so if you can establish some kind of program to protect those trees, that really keeps that entire ecosystem viable, right? And the lizards themselves have some commercial value. So that was the whole point of this system, right? Was they were giving out permits that allowed these guys like my buddy Roberto. We bought a big chunk of land, we preserved the oak trees there, and we had the locals, instead of hacking the animals up with machetes, which is what they were doing because they thought they were venomous and they were afraid of them. Now they recognize these things have some value. Let's protect them. We set up a vivarium type of a situation there with a bunch of screen cages. The kids, we taught them how to feed the animals, how to take care of them. We got babies, and we sent out a small number. Like back in 2006, I think we imported like 15 babies, right? And then each one of them, I think I was selling them for about $1,000 a piece at that time, and this is Abronia graminia. But we went through all this headache to get them out legally with documents and paperwork, and I did that for about 6 years with Roberto. And all the money we made, I just kept sending back down to him, and we'd buy more land, and we'd set up more projects, and our goal was to include all these different species. And around that same time, about 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, other people started catching on. I think just social media in general just kind of took off, and the internet became a conduit to connect buyers and sellers. And people started figuring out they could just ship these animals up through the border and not have to get all the paperwork, right? They didn't have to go through the expense and the time to do that. And it started to decrease the demand for the animals that we had. And I was the only one in the United States who had really figured all this out on a private individual level. And part of that is because I speak Spanish fluently and I had a lot of passion for this project. I was willing to dump thousands of dollars into it and pursue it, right? And I had for me, it was perfect. There was the lizards I loved to work with. I was helping out my buddy down there. He needed the financial and the kind of the economic aspect of it, and it set up this conservation effort. So from that, I created the Abronia, kind of the project that you've heard of, and projectabronia.com was my little website, and I had a forum, and that was when I was kind of in my heyday working with the animals. But it all kind of slowed down when all the illegal stuff started coming in, and I got really frustrated with that, just because it it kind of killed the project that we were doing from an economic standpoint. I couldn't sell my animals for $300 and still do all the things that we were doing. It wouldn't be viable. Not at the numbers. We were doing small numbers, you know. We had maybe 15 or 20 animals that we'd import each year with documents. So I do have country of origin documents from Mexico, and I went through all that pain, and we got that for several years. And our goal was always to increase and add on new species, but it became more and more difficult because then eventually they got to the point where I would hear things like, 50 Lithochila would get shipped in, and half of them would die, and people just didn't understand what they were doing with the animals. So it got kind of a negative perspective. Like it just kind of changed over time. And anyway, that's part of the story. We could go on that topic for another hour and a half and probably bore you guys to tears, but I see Dave glazing over. He's like,
oh, this isn't glazing over, buddy. I'm all ears. Listening to this, even if we've had this conversation before, I'd still want to have it again.
Yeah.
So everything you guys set up then, is it just over, done, or is there anything still going on with the conservation, everything you guys have put in place?
No, so Roberto is still going. He still travels around the country doing expos, educating. He has his little, the original objective that we had with that project was to get him into a career of conservation, and it has achieved that. He doesn't make a ton of money, but he makes enough to survive, and he's doing what he loves, and he's got his daughters now doing this stuff, and they've kind of grown up. They're young adults now, both of his daughters. Like when I first started going there, they were like 5 and 7. So that was, how long ago was that? It's like 12 years ago, right? So 12, 13 years ago. Yeah, 14 years ago. I'm losing track of time. Anyway, his girls are all grown up. They do speaking. They teach people about the animals. They teach people how to protect the forest. He still does eco tours. He'll have people, and I'll connect him with people if they want to go down and visit the habitat. And he's great. He's written a book on Abronia. He still keeps all kinds of species of animals from Mexico. He still has permits to export stuff. But we haven't done importation of Abronia for quite a while. It actually got much more difficult to get the stamps and to get the permits, and for some of the newer species, and especially when they turned everything into, everything became CITES.
Yep.
All the species went to CITES 2, and about 9 of the species went to CITES 1. So that happened, about 3 years ago. So then it became even more difficult. I'm not aware of any true documented animals coming out of Mexico lately. There might be some, but I'm not aware of them.
Okay. Well, all one big tragic story, honestly. I hate to hear that. It sucks because, it's a positive that turned into a negative based on poaching, and people saw that a resource was worth something, and it kind of took away from everything else you guys were working on, which sucks.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be a downer, because there are some good things that came from even the poaching on a small scale. I'll say diversified collections and put some animals into hands that wouldn't otherwise, we wouldn't know what to do with those animals, right? We wouldn't learn from them. So I've actually had animals and kept animals in my collection that I knew were not properly documented. I knew their origins weren't pure, right? They didn't have a stamp from being cleared across the border, and my wife really encouraged me not to do any of that stuff, but I couldn't help it. I was too tempted by the animals. They're beautiful, and that was kind of my passion. And I was like, I don't want these things to go to the wrong hands and get killed, and so I kind of justified my actions that way. But I kept all these cool species, Smithy, Arita, Vasconcelosi, and tried to work with them and establish them over a period of years. The Vasconcelosi I actually got in 2003, and I kept them and bred them for about 17 years. So yeah, I didn't, and I learned a lot working with that species, which I then took all that learning to the other species, and they're all very similar. I would have to say, once you know how to work with an Abronia, you're going to be able to work with all of them, with one exception. The Abronia frosty, I don't think should be in captive care. They're just too complicated. Everybody I know who has tried to keep them have failed at keeping them. they're too specialized. I think they're from a higher elevation and they need to be kept quite a bit cooler, and they don't thrive in captivity. And in addition to that, they're super rare, so they shouldn't even be out of the country. But I've just in my conversations with people, they have not been able to keep those things going. And they're high strung. That's another factor. So, and Mixteca is another one that's very high strung. Unless you get captive born babies, they tend to acclimate and establish pretty well. But the adults, I have found they tend to be stressed out, and they get a lot of the Mixteca will get a fungal infection that you can see on their skin, and I think it might be something that they can pass along, to a cage mate. So I've had to battle with those things over the years and figure it out. But the species that actually do really well long term in captivity, I would say at the top of the list, Lytorchilla. I think those do really well. People have bred them for generations. Vasconcelosi I've done for generations. I got F3s. The Arita are very similar to the Vasconcelosi. Another one that's pretty high energy, kind of a stressor, is Smithy. So Abronia Smithy looks similar to, especially if you get into the eastern part of their zone, where they're only 100 kilometers away from Arita. They're literally right across the border. So they're in Chiapas, right down there, kind of just on the east. They're on the western side of Guatemala, right? That Guatemalan border, there's 100 kilometers between Smithy and Arita, but the two populations are separated by a mountain range. Very clearly are different animals. The Smithy are much more like, you try to handle them, they'll bite you. You try to pick them up, they flail and dive, and they go crazy. And it always varies by individual, but as a general rule, Smithy are just high strung. They just don't like themselves or the world. So you got to be kind of more hands off with them. But oops, something happened there. I could feel my little earpiece falling out of my ears. Now my computer's trying to launch music. Don't do that. Hopefully you guys can still hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you,
buddy.
Anyway, the Smithy, I would say that's more of an expert species. All right. They're beautiful. They're very tempting. I know Forrest had a bunch of them, and he has some really nice looking ones. I've had several of them. I've had some that were doing great, and then all of a sudden went downhill for no apparent reason, and it's very frustrating when that happens. Yeah, so I was just saying, probably the top of the list for me as far as species that you want to work with in captivity, I like the Lytorchilla from from the southern part of the country there. San Cristobal de las Casas is the name of the town, and just outside of that is where they're found. So if you want to look up the kind of the temperatures and all that stuff, go research that. But there's a lot of variety. There's calicos, there's the red ones, there's the gray with the yellow and orange. You can get in the calico varieties. Some of them have high white, some of them have really high black, some of them have the red. So that's just a great species to work with. They adapt well.
That's
I prefer them. I prefer them over the other species as far as just being able to manage them long term and breed them into F1, F2, F3, stuff like that.
Gotcha.
Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead. I want to hear that.
Did you have more Abronia stuff? Because I want to get into a couple other species.
Oh yeah, we got some more Abronia stuff. That's not even a
Okay,
real
go
fucking question, buddy.
ahead.
Okay, so a couple more questions because clearly Ben is very bored of you at the moment. It doesn't want to talk about Abronia anymore.
I'm just
So
excited.
is there always a lot of diversity in colors within a species of Aronia, or are there just certain regions and certain ones that just tend to have a lot of variety, like you're saying?
Yeah, there's pretty good variety within a species group. So, for example, Taeniata, for the most part, kind of the normal look you would see is black and yellow or black and white. In captivity, the yellow tends to diminish over time, and that's for a lot of reasons, but I think it's mostly related to diet and carotenes specifically. If the animals are not getting what they would get in the wild, then their colors diminish, which kind of sucks, to be honest, because in the wild they're just beautiful, right? And I can always tell right away if an animal has been wild collected recently because I can see it in the colors. In fact, once the animal sheds, that first shed that comes off of a wild animal will have yellow in the shed, and you can see it. So, and gradually over time, that kind of diminishes and gets replaced with white. So you'll see an animal that was a Taeniata, for example, is black body with yellow stripes. The yellow stripes eventually become kind of white or cream color, and then they become white. I've had animals that had become kind of whitish and then restored the yellow by adding some carotenes to the diet. So, man, this thing keeps falling out. Apparently, I've got really odd shaped ears or something. so with Taeniata, I was trying to say there is some variation in that species where they be. I've seen them in the wild where they were green, right? Kind of a weird looking olive, limey green, where I thought it almost looked like a graminia, but it was clearly not a graminia. It was right alongside the black and yellow animals. So that can happen. And then within the range of Taeniata, so you got the northern range and then you got the southern range. In the southern range, the Taeniata can look totally different from the ones in the north, like almost like they would be a different species, but again, apparently they're Taeniata. So with Lythrochilla, I think that's probably the most diverse group of all the Abronia species in its appearance, right? In its color schemes. It can be so diverse, which I think is something that's kind of cool, right? So you get a litter of babies, they all look brown when they start. And then as they start getting older, you'll start to get some that have a lot of spots. You get some that have a lot of red. You get some that are just slate gray. You get some that look like they've got lichen on them with the yellows. Really cool variations. So,
can you line breed for any of that?
I have not been able to breed these animals consistently enough over enough generations to say that I'm line breeding anything. So just to be totally honest about that, we haven't got there yet. Not with Abronia.
It's interesting.
Now, outside of you in the United States, and we knew that forest collection was a very large collection, in my opinion. Are there any other people that are worth keeping an eye on in the hobby that are, working with the species in volume? Even if we're only talking 20 or 30 animals.
Yeah, there's a handful of guys. And now because of the kind of the negative stuff that's circling around, they probably don't want to be named.
We don't have to name them.
But I do know a few guys that keep a pretty good sized collection and are doing well with them and have had them for years. One guy I'm thinking of has produced more babies than me, in the last 10 years. So he's really figured it out. And honestly, he keeps them in his basement. And I think part of the reason he's had so much success is he's able to really nail the temperature controls down there. So So there's a handful of guys out there, but it's not very many. Not very many have big collections.
Okay.
I wouldn't say.
Well, you know what? I do want to come back to this, Ben. I'm willing to jump around because I know there were some animals you saw that Jason had you want to talk about. I'm willing to come back to Abronia later, maybe.
I can add one more thing to Bernie. Have you ever talked to Ryan McVeigh over at Zilla? They have husbandry labs there that, you know, they can work out if you're having trouble with a species. They do a lot of testing where they can work out, you know, new ways maybe to work on heat gradients and things like that. That's kind of like one of the big things they do.
I would love to talk to Ryan. I know him just on Facebook, but I don't know him that well. I saw that he did a fundraiser for Forrest, which, you know, when Forrest passed, which I thought was amazing, very thoughtful on his part. And even though I don't know the guy, I like him a lot just for that alone. But yeah, I'd like to check that out. I didn't know they were doing kind of husbandry research, but I mean, one thing I think would be really cool to do with Abronia is set up a kind of a chiller in the tank. If you could do a little refrigeration coil or something that cools a rock, and then have some moss that's over that rock, because honestly, that's what they got in the wild. There was one time I was in Taniana habitat again, and I remember that day was like a record heat day. It was 91 degrees there. And people think, oh, it never gets that hot. It does get that hot sometimes there. And it's not all the time, but they'll have those 5 or 6 day stretches where they get a heat wave. So this is one of those times. It was 91 degrees. That we weren't finding any animals out on the trees, but we did find them along under the shade of a tree, right up nestled in under this thick layer of moss that was draped over a boulder. And the boulder and the temperature where that moss and that boulder was probably about 58 degrees. I didn't really check with the temperature, but from touching it, it was cool to the touch. You know, it was like, okay, this is way colder than what's out here on the tree. So those kind of things happen, right? In the wild, there's all that thermal regulation, that microclimate that exists that we need to be cognizant of when we're setting them up in captive husbandry. So
yeah, we can definitely connect you with them at some point. I'm gonna actually just bring up a text message so that I can remind myself to talk to him about that.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah, that's a great idea, interesting idea. I think that actually would work with a bunch of species. I actually never thought of a cold rock, like creating a cold rock. I think that's a great idea.
Sounds like a new product line.
Just,
you might not want to talk to Zilla.
or even just if you could just run a refrigeration line or something across the back of your tanks, just like we do with heat tape, right? And just put it up on the back of the tank so it just kind of creates that radiant temperature in, and it establishes some refuge for them, right? Especially with babies, I think that would be critical. You just want to make sure that it wouldn't be like ice cold to where the animal crawls down and can't escape that zone. But you know, I think you could achieve it with what I use is that long strand sphagnum moss, which everybody uses for growing orchids, right? That's what that kind of blondie stuff that's like looks like yarn. So I use that as substrate on all my Abronia cages.
Really cool. Yeah, I mean, pretty complex species, man. I'm just gonna say it might not be for the beginner. And the sad thing is, you know, you do go to certain shows and you see them there, and they're at that place where just about anybody could pick them up if they really wanted to. But like you said, I'm sure a majority of people will take them home fail. You know, it's a misconception with reptiles is that they always need heat, but that's just not the case with all of them. Heat stresses a lot of them out, and you know, even we haven't brought them up in like 2 weeks, but holy shit, what did we not bring up for 2 weeks? Oh, the python we talk about every week. Poland's pythons. Jesus. Yeah, just talking heat gradient with them and everything else, and you know, people's failures earlier in the hobby with them, and a lot of that is heat related.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure there's some other tricks in the trade with them, and I'm not going to discredit anybody who's been good breeding them or has had success, but if you're paying attention to your temperatures, paying attention to the climate that your species comes from, you have a fighting chance to do well with them. But just treating them like a ball python or anything else you have in your collection just doesn't work with every reptile.
Right. I would say on average, most people that keep Abronia keep them too hot, too dry, and don't provide enough highs and lows on the temperatures.
Yeah.
I knew a guy probably 12, 15 years ago. There was a guy that had two, a male and a female that he had kept in his apartment for about 3 years, and he never had any success breeding them. And it was Abronia graminia, but it was just that very thing. It just was not keeping them cool enough, and especially in the winter, they have to cool down in order to have breeding success. That's just been proven over and over again now with the species. So a different friend of mine was keeping them in his basement in Colorado and was able to produce animals that way. So and in my experience, I've just always kept mine outdoors for half the year, so that's all I've done for now almost 15 years, 16 years, whatever it's been. I guess it's 17 years.
Is there a period of brumation with these guys? I'm sorry, we got more Abronia talk, but is there brumation, or just simply this hot and cold gradient in your cages does the trick for cycling them?
And in the winter, they definitely have a cool down period there in Mexico and Guatemala. So I try to match that. I get them down into the, kind of the low 50s. And then I'll bump the temperatures up during the day to maybe low to high 60s for a period of weeks, right? For several weeks, you can do that. And they do get dormant, right? They're in the wild. When I've looked for them in the winter time, when we didn't expect to find them out basking, right, we would find them on the south, always on the southern exposure, right, where the sun is hitting. So you'd find them on the southern facing slopes, on the south part of the tree, inside a bromeliad that was facing south, if you can imagine. So that's where they were. They were just perfectly nestle down in that thing to absorb the heat, to take the heat, because I knew where the heat was coming the next morning. So that was kind of a little tip that we finally figured out with locating the animals. And so what do you learn from that? Well, I just try to always take everything I see in the wild and interpret that into my enclosure, right? And so I would have light on one side, over to one side, and I would try to achieve the temperatures in the winter. And so if I'm keeping my animals indoors, which in Tennessee, the winters here are too cold, right? We have days where it's perfect outside, where it's just like Orizaba or just like Chichi Castanango or all these different places where they're found. And then we have other days where it's 6 degrees. That ain't going to work. So, I would have them inside, but I would have them kind of all my cages in one area where I could crack a window, and the temperatures could drop down at night in the room to like 50 degrees, 55 degrees, and that works. And by the way, that also cycles my Egernia, so that worked out okay.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Benjamin, what did you see that piqued your interest? Let's get talking about a bunch of stuff now.
So I'm really into Egernia as well. And I see you have a few species of Egernia. I don't know, like people, I don't see them as much, but they are some of the coolest lizards, man, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really selling it, bud.
I don't know, I just really like them. So, I mean, they're cool, and you can cohab a lot of the species. So I think it's fun. They're just cool.
Yeah. So when you say cohab, you mean like combined species together?
No.
Colony.
1, 2, you can put together.
Oh, you can do a colony. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. They do live in colonies. like the Cunningham eyes and the Stokes eye for sure live in colonies. And you can have little family, groups. You can also, you got to be careful. I've heard horror stories of people putting a new animal in with the group and that new animal gets destroyed, like literally dismantled. That can happen. So be careful. Yeah. So I've kind of gravitated to these guys. I like the Depressa complex. So that's Epsisolus is the orange ones.
Yep. I like the Depressa.
And those are these ones here are my favorite. The Egernia Epsisolus is my favorite of the group. Just for their color alone and their behavior. Like they're really bold. I can reach in the cage and be cleaning things out, and they come right up to me and try to poke it, whatever I'm doing, just investigate for food. They're very used to me feeding them, so that's been like a kind of, it's only recent. I've only been working with the Depressa. Well, I started with the Egernia Depressa in 2010, so about 10 years ago. And I've only had Epsisolus for a few years. And about 3 years ago, I got the Stokesi Badia, which is a bigger, kind of a brown species. Yeah, there's Depressa babies. Yeah. I don't remember the date on that. That looks like last year.
June 2019 is what this is saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I've produced baby Depressa now every year for the last like 8 years. At least got one pair. So
and I hear they're not like terribly hard. Is that true?
They're easy. Yeah, I would say they're very easy. That's one of the reasons I love them. Because I've had my fill with the complicated high maintenance animals. So Egernia is kind of like it's like cotton candy, It's just so easy to to take care of those things.
I mean, these things are just so cool.
Yeah, that's the Badia right there. So Egernia Stokesi Badia is honestly, it's a totally different species. That is not a Stokesi, right? So it looks kind of like Stokesi, so everybody would refer to that, and that is what it's named, but it's very clear it's a larger animal. It has longer spines in the tail. The behavior is a little different. They don't seem to, in my opinion, they don't seem to colonize as much as Stokesi would. So, but I've only been working with these for about 3 years. And I did produce babies last year for the first time, which is really exciting. I still got those animals. They're now about 9 months old. Going pretty strong.
Yeah. The Egernia, and I've held a few of them and been offered a little bit. People have asked me for trade for a couple of them before for the Depressa, and I've held a couple, and I like them. I think they seem calm and they seem like a pretty easy setup. It's just seems like it would be not a bad deal.
They're a lot of fun. All the Egernia species are very personable. They eventually will adapt well to you as the primary caregiver. And one of the things people will make a mistake is if you give them too many hiding spots, then they're going to hide and you won't see them that often. But if you set up their, like the Depressa, for example, that's a tree dweller. So they live in the trees. So I put all my Depressa have some wood in the enclosure. It's not going to hurt them to not have a hiding spot, right? They will eventually get used to you coming in to the room and moving around and working, and they'll eventually figure out that you're giving them food, and then you've got a relationship, right, with your animals, which is kind of fun. That makes it more fun to me, versus if you give them lots of hiding spots. The Depressa of all these animals, the Depressa are probably the most secretive, and they're just their instinct is to stay inside the cork bark, right, or inside the tube or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so you just won't see them as often. Now I have one male that is still skittish and just I think he's forever afraid that I'm going to eat him or something. But the female is always out, right? She's always like very bold. I'll put the crickets out. She comes running over, dives into the cricket bucket, all the time. So they're a lot of fun though. A lot of fun to work with.
Dave, you got more, or do you want me to?
No, keep going, man. I'm listening. I talked for the first hour. You get at least 15 minutes now.
Wow.
So, this is all falling on you now, Benjamin.
So you have a handful of snakes. What snake species do you keep?
Sand boas. That's it. Well, I guess just recently I added tricolor hogs.
Yeah, so I saw that picture of tricolor hog. That's one of the reasons I got.
Yeah.
Look, I do
like those.
Sand boa guy. I think that they're cool, and Ryan and I have when we first started, and I knew nothing about reptiles. I said sand boas are going to be the next big thing. I said it like the first year, and then every year over the last 9.5 years, Ryan's like, "So sand boas this year?" Or like, I mean, they're good and people like them, but they haven't like blown up like crazy, But they make great pets and things like that, and I like them. But it's just not something that we're working with at the moment. But we did try a couple of tricolored hognose, and when we got them, I don't know what the guy that we got them from. It was like a third party. A guy sold them to us, a pair, and they both died like within a couple weeks. And we were like,
wow,
that's interesting. So
that sucks.
Yeah, so that reminds me, I gotta tell that guy still owes us a pair, but
dang it. Well, that's not a very.
I think they're a cool species, the tricolor hognose.
Yeah,
Tries are beautiful, and I think you can actually overbreed them. Like I think you can have up to 3 or 4 clutches, and once you get to that 4th range, it gets a little troublesome.
Yeah, they'll breed.
Yeah, I'm sure it's like a veiled chameleon, right? If you do breed them, they're gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Until you burn them out, and that's probably true. I've heard the same thing. I'm honestly pretty inexperienced with hognose snakes, just starting out again. I've had them in the past, and I've kept them for years, but I haven't had them for almost 5 years now. So, and I just got a pair from a friend of mine. We did a trade on some animals, and he's been producing them and breeding them for quite a while. I'm going to hopefully learn some things from him. So I just like the look of the animal, and they got the little scoop nose. I think they're kind of cute. But if I'm allowed to say that as a man, do I have to give up my man card for using that?
Say something.
Not on this show, buddy.
As long as it was a female, I guess.
So
I gotta walk away. I've got something. I got technical difficulties over here. I'm gonna walk over here and cough for a minute.
You're like choking on something. Maybe because he's been outside that bowling alley. What is he sitting on? Is that a lawn chair?
It's
like an American flag.
He's very into American flag stuff. We always worry when he's at, he has to go to the bowling alley most times, and he gets a lot of visitors, and so sometimes I'll have like a couple pretty nosy raccoons and things. You'd be surprised. So like,
serious? Oh man,
we always get nervous that he's gonna get taken or something like that's gonna happen.
He's gonna get attacked.
Yeah. So what? So you do a lot of sambos. So what? Talk to me about sambos.
Yeah, sambo is really it's a great species to work with. I'll give a full 2 thumbs up endorsement for sandboas. We started working with them. It's only been like I guess it's been almost 3 years ago now. I got my first sandboas from Steve Beamer at Reptile Collective. Great guy. He's here local, lives about a half hour from me. And then I got a couple more. I started getting, Dave, are you going to be okay? You going to survive? Do we need to send you a...
Just keep on working your way through this. Ignore me.
I'm not sure. But I just find him fascinating. The colors, the different morphs and the genetics now that are coming out. That one there that you were looking at, that's an albino stripe that we produced. I've still got that animal. It's a little female, really, and she looks even better now. That's another one. That's an albino stripe, and there's a snow. That's what they call a snow. So snow is produced if you combine an anery with an albino, you can end up with a snow. Go ahead,
So
Dave.
I've always, I mean to interrupt you, but this has maybe come up in conversation before. Something that really confused me about Samboas, and the picture would have helped with what I was going to say. We're going to have to go back to that in a second. But why don't the snows have pink eyes? Like, why does that animal look like it has a darker pigment eye? I mean, that eye color looks like it's a black or a blue from here. And I find in Sambos, it's not uncommon to get snows with that darker pigment eye. And I actually had a discussion recently. Is there some kind of T positive involved in this? Like, is the T negative albino really a T positive albino? But can you zoom in on the eye at all?
I can try if you can zoom in.
Oh, God. I mean, you can tell it's a darker pigment eye. It doesn't look pink.
Yeah, it's not pink. I mean, they come from, the snow is derived from an anery crossed with an albino, right? But the albinos are, honestly, they're probably not, I don't know. Now we're going to venture into territory that I'm not really an expert. I do not know genetics, Dave. So
can you bullshit your way through this?
I don't know. We can try. I'll see if I can get through it. I do know a little bit on the Samboas. At least if you combine certain things with certain things, you'll get certain things. I can speak to that level. But
pretty solid.
So amelanistic, right? That's what these animals are. I don't think they're a true albino where it's an all white animal with red eyes. So amelanistic is if you pull up my IG page, you'll see an animal that's orange and yellow, like a big female. And that was sold to me as an albino or a hypo tangerine albino or something like that. I think what the animal truly is, and that's one of the offspring that came from that female. That's a little male, I think. Is that that's Carl's Jr. male. So if you look really closely at him, he's got a little star on his back that looks like the Carl's. You can scroll to the next picture. See if you can. I think I threw it up there. You see the star there?
Oh.
Maybe I'm being generous.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have called him Patrick.
I see it now. I got it. Yeah, it took a second.
I should have called him Patrick from SpongeBob or something.
Yeah.
You could have made a Mario Brothers reference with that too. I think Mario Brothers would have been good. It looks like he has the two eyes like the star in Mario Brothers.
There he is. The star is kind of morphed into a crappy looking star nowadays. Dave, what were you drinking earlier? I'm going to make sure I avoid that in the future.
Here's the problem. I've dug a very deep hole for myself. I'm eating munchies. And as you might know about munchies, you got a lot of variety in this pack. So I started with a Dorito that got stuck on my tonsil. So I thought I'd eat a Cheeto to knock it off, and that didn't help. So then I threw a pretzel at it, and that didn't do it. And then I figured, well, maybe I'll just take a bite of the pepper beef jerky I have. And then it was just, I don't think I can cure this now. I think it's all downhill now. I don't think I can fix my problem.
Can't breathe.
Yeah, I got water now.
Drink the water.
Closing up right now. Not great.
Is there anybody there that can give you the Heimlich? That's the more important thing.
I mean, we've already established in my area, unless you're ODing, nobody's helping you with anything. So I don't know if what do they call that when they jab you in the heart when you're ODing? What's that shot called? None of us know, right?
Epinephrine. Whatever. I think it's EpiPen.
Yeah, that's not an EpiPen. You're talking about diabetes now.
No, that's for allergic reaction. Epinephrine's for allergic reaction. You're talking about it starts with an N, right?
I couldn't hear you. I was coughing.
It starts with an N. I forget what it's called.
Right.
I have the internet.
The main thing is, no, there's no help out here. I'll be okay. It's just not great for the podcast. But at this point, what can you do? Sandbows. Yeah.
Narcan. Narcan. That's what it's called.
Oh, you figured it out.
Okay.
Thank
Oh
you.
yeah. I've never heard that word used in my entire life, so at no point was I even thinking that was a possibility. But all right, now that I fucked up our rhythm, we're trying to get a little something going here again. I will say this, and I won't say shit actually. One thing too, like coming over to your house and meeting the kids was, when you get younger kids into something, and that's the great thing about having a father that's into it too, and you always see these second generation kids coming up holding clutches of eggs and being interactive with the animals. Like even your kids showing off their Sambos and all that, really, really thrilling. Like just to see them all excited about it. I think they even went over with like the snake hook. I think they even tailed them a little bit as they lifted them up. Like it was a whole experience, which I really enjoyed. And as for Benjamin and the whole Samboa thing, I've been saying that for years of blood pythons. Blood pythons have all kinds of variety. Why aren't they more popular? And there's a lot of species that you never really know when they're going to really take off. I'm sure before you're on a breeding bench, someone's going to give a fuck about a Samboa outside of the small community that does now. But I don't know. Don't hold your breath.
I think if you can get them enough of them in like a chain pet store. I know it seems counterintuitive, but if you can get them out to, a decent price point out to main public pet people, they'll start taking off a bit more.
I mean, it could. I mean, the Androthristix albinos have been at pet stores for years, in my opinion. Not a lot of, but the mom and pop stores have had them. But now your pet goes are pet smart. Fuck. Plus, Tracy Barker was into them years ago, and then she got out. We brought up Holloway recently in some conversations we had to the side, who does the Paint Project and the Splash and all that other stuff, which is absolutely amazing. I'm sure there's a degree of line breeding that can be done with these guys that may not have been done yet. I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't take off. It's a very easy species.
That's one of the biggest draws of the whole thing is they're easy to keep, and the average person can kind of get in there and start figuring it out, like even a dumb guy like me, So me and my kids, and that was really, I would have gotten into Samboas if it wasn't for Seth. And Seth is 13 now, but he was the one that really wanted them. Heck, I'd still be just doing a bunch of lizards, but now I'm into the Samboas. I love them, and I got converted to damn snakes, I guess. So, it wasn't something I never would have guessed that I'd keep 30 Sandboas, but that's what we got out there. And I love all the colors. I don't think 10 years ago you had all these color traits that could be crossed and picked up, and Holloway has done a lot to progress that stuff. You mentioned him. He's a great guy, by the way, Jeff, one of my favorite people in the reptile industry, just really honest, hardworking, hundreds of thousands of hours of experience, in particular with Samboas. And he does know the genetics. He's really sharp on that stuff, and he's figured some things out. He's created his own, genetic traits and produced animals that he could reproduce that same trait. And then, I mean, there's one snake out there. It's called the HRP. It's named after him, the Holloway reduced pattern. And it's one of the coolest looking things. It's a black and white anery that has high white. And I went to the Tinley show back when we were doing reptile shows before the stupid pandemic shit happened. And he was there, and he had like 6 or 7 of these HRPs, and the one that had the highest white, I think he sold it before the show even opened for $1,000. And that was when I was kind of like, okay, man, these things have some commercial viability as well, and now since then I've probably spent $20,000 on my Samboa collection over the last 3 years. And I got some crazy ones, so that's a lot of fun.
Well,
No,
if you
for
want,
sure. You know, having Steve in your backyard doesn't hurt either. The guy's got a very beautiful collection, very diverse, has been doing it for a very long time. So, you
Yeah.
know, I don't blame you. And you brought a few by my
Steve
table when I see you. And I've always wanted them.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to buy them off you after you've bought them.
I do remember that. Another guy here, local Aaron Sullivan, is another guy that keeps a lot of Sambos, does a great job with them. Rufus Darden. So there's like 3 people right there that are all in Tennessee that have great collections and producing some killer genetics. Like Rufus is doing a lot of stuff with the Russians, which are the black, like mostly black with little white dots. And then I bought one of his, it's an albino stripe paradox. So it's the paradox is the black dots. And then, the albino is, I think it's really just an amelanistic animal, right? It's an orange, like a bright orange. And then it's got a stripe going down the back. And recently, if you look at my IG page, I've posted a few snakes up there. There's there's one out there that's called a snow paradox that, it's got a lot of black dots. And the paradox can have high expression, which is a lot of black, or low expression, which is not very much black. And obviously, the high expression paradox is kind of more sought after animal. See that there's an albino paradox. So I bought that one from Charlie, and oh my gosh, what is her name? Oh, help me out.
Don't
Brittany.
worry about it.
Charlie and Brittany, another great pair of Samboa breeders, and so I bought these 2 little Samboas from them a couple years back, and my daughter named them Charlie and Brittany. So, that is one that we produce. That's a snow stripe.
Really
so
cool.
It's kind of a cool looking snake. Be interesting to see when that one grows up.
It's another interesting thing is, paradoxing has popped up in a lot of different albinos, but it's never really been inheritable. But with the Samboas, that's one of the few species that had a paradox that turned out to be a true genetic paradoxing. But it's a very weird gene too, because it really piggybacks the albinos, because you can make anearthristics, you can make normals from the paradox lineages, and you never make paradoxing in your normals. It only shows up in your albinos and your snow boas. So I don't know
exactly. There's a snow paradox right there. Do you think the paradox that we're looking at right here is actually pied? Do you think that's what it is, if we were to put a name to it?
I mean, arguably, honestly, the thing is, whoever made it the first time, if they started calling it a pied, we'd be calling it a pied to this day. But when it comes to genetic makeups and stuff like that, none of us really know what the fuck anything really is outside of your basics. I mean, look at the ball python community. There's 3,000 different names out there for 3,000 different things, and not any of them really have anything to do with the genetic makeup.
Right. Yeah. People trademark a name, and they're the ones producing it because they figured it out and they were able to reproduce it, and now it's a thing. So
yep.
Well,
another cool thing
one point
is. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to give you like a little insider tip here from something I learned from the Samboa breeding community. And this is not something I figured out, certainly. But there's 2 or 3 of these guys, and they used to say that you couldn't cross a regular albino, or what they consider a bell albino, with a paradox albino. Those 2 weren't compatible, meaning if you cross them, you were not going to get what you thought you were going to get, which would be albino animals. You're actually going to get animals that look normal. But what you actually get is double hets. And those double hets, if you take those 2 offspring, now what they figured out is if you cross those 2 offspring, you get double visuals. So it took them about 6 or 7 years to figure that out. And the first person that I'm aware of that's producing those is Jeff Holloway, and he's calling them a neon. So it's another crazy looking morph that he had to go through a lot of work to produce, to finally, he had to kind of go through a lot of crap proverbially speaking, to get to that point. But he created a really cool morph where they actually did figure out that you can cross those two genetics and get something. It just took a generation to reach it. So,
I mean, I did know about the Paradox being its own gene of the Paradox Albino. I didn't realize that they produced a double visual with both T-negative lines of Albino yet, so that is actually pretty cool. Is it, I mean, we're going to have to dig up this picture, and, you know, you keep on bringing up Holloway. I'll be honest, I did reach out to him in a message, but I haven't heard back from him yet. If you want to put in a good word, he is definitely a guy I'd love to have on here. Like you said, he's very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
He's worked with turtles. He's a big herper, if I remember right. What he's done with Sambos over the years, very established. Yeah. No pressure, buddy. I saw the look on your face when I told you to put in a good word. And you're like, oh, fuck. Like,
here's exactly what I thought. I thought the only reason Holloway talked to me is because he liked my kid. My 12-year-old bought a $1,000 snake from him at the Tinley show, and then ever since then, he's taken a vested interest in us. But yeah, Jeff, you know, one thing about him, he's super busy, and he gets hit up all the time, as you might imagine, by hundreds of Sambo enthusiasts, especially newbies. But I'm sure he would love to talk to you because you're one of these old timers like me that has a lot of years and a lot of miles on you, and you'll probably end up just like every time I try to talk to Holloway, I have in my mind that this is going to be a 5-minute conversation, and it ends up going to be like an hour at least, because there's so much stuff that we kind of jump into. Just like this conversation right now, this could have been a 5-minute, but it's, you know, here we are, whatever, it's 2 hours. So.
I don't think anyone's complaining except for the 50 or 60 people that stopped watching 25 minutes ago, but, you know, for each their own. Yeah.
I guess when are you guys keeping track of who's watching this? Like, is there a number?
We have addresses and phone numbers and social security cards there, social security numbers, if that's what you're asking.
we do get, you know, all the viewership out of the YouTube, but with podcasts, a lot of times people listen and they don't watch YouTube. So we're out on a whole bunch of different platforms that you can just listen to this. So if you're out there listening, you're missing out on the pictures. But it's like on Google Podcast and iHeartRadio and stuff like that. I can track I think one of the platforms pretty easily of how many people are listening off of that platform, but it's not one of the popular ones. Like Podbean is the platform that we use. So everything else just pulls from that. And it's hard for me to track how many people are actually listening, you know, but I hear people, you know, say, oh yeah, I listen to your podcast, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I don't know that they're listening it off of one of the ones that I'm tracking, you know?
Yeah. I think one thing that Ben brought to my attention, which was honestly a pat on the back for what we were doing, was, on the one platform, the Ron St. Pierre one, which was like 3 hours and 20 minutes long, I think it was the first 8 or first 10 people that watched it on this platform, watched it from the beginning to the end, which says a lot, because that's not always the case. Attention spans, man, 3 hours of anything is a lot.
That is insane, yeah. I usually don't have 3 hours to do anything in a given day. Doesn't matter what it would be.
Yeah.
Now,
but people listen while they're driving or while they're working in the room or whatever, you know?
Yeah. Right. We have a few fans out there. Let's see, Ron St. Pierre likes to post a lot of our videos, and that's very appreciative. There's William Philippek in St. Louis who watches most of our stuff just because he likes me. So, you know, there's a couple people out there, but, you know, we're going to get there. We're there. I'm not really sure anymore, but I'm really loving it. And like I said, I get to talk to people that I already talked to on the regular, or at least in passing, and have great conversation to share with other people. So, you know, fuck it, got to do something.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a man crush on your mustache, so I guess that's why I'm here.
I appreciate it, man. I'm just gonna put it out there. You're my favorite silver fox in the industry.
Wow. That's a
silver fox.
It says a lot, buddy. It says a lot. But
yeah, I don't color my hair. I'm not trying to change anything.
I know you're naturally good looking, bud. You don't have to defend yourself.
It is what it is.
Hey, don't change a thing, buddy. So again, you know, this is usually the part, like I told you, where we just start kind of going off on our own little things. Another thing about you, man. So first off, scientific names out the ass. Like, you probably know more scientific names than I know morphs. And that says a lot, because I know a lot of fucking morphs. And then on top of that, geodes and rocks and gems and all that other stuff you do on the side, very fascinating. Some amazing things to look at when we come to your house.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Yeah, I got too many hobbies, I guess. I don't know. Or maybe you can never have enough. But I do love rocks. That's something that has kind of evolved in the last, I'd say, about 5 years. I've just kind of gotten addicted to yeah, we go crystal mining. So he just put a picture up of a giant crystal. That one's called the Christmas tree that was found in Arkansas. And for your listeners, anybody who thinks they might be interested in rocks, if you want to get yourself kind of hooked on this, go to Arkansas, go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, all the Mount Ida, all these areas around there. There's several mines where you can dig, and you can go in, you pay a fee for the day, and you can dig and you keep whatever you find. And so this one here, this is Avant Mine. They do private digs. They have a place called Hamilton Hill, where we went and we paid a fee, and our whole family went there. We had my wife's brother and his family, so there's like a group of 12 of us that all went out and descended on the mountain with our picks and shovels, and we dug around in the mud, and we came up with some really cool stuff, some really cool crystals. And this piece here that's up on the picture is like $1 million. That's a giant piece. That's not normal.
Yeah.
So that one there, that smaller one, I mean, I say smaller, that's one of the biggest ones we found. That's a single point. I posted a little video of it on Instagram, but that's a really clear, nice point. And yeah, it's hard to come across one like that, but you can find all kinds of little clusters. One of our favorite things to do outside of just going and digging for these rocks is to go to the rock shows. So all across the country, you know, if you look up mineral and rock shows or gem shows, I'm just fascinated by the diversity of stones that come out of the earth, right? Just the incredible colors and formations that come out of nature. It's insane. So like one of my favorites is opal, right? The opal that comes out of Australia. Some of that stuff will just blow your mind. The colors.
Mm-hmm.
And fossils. I'm into fossils too. There's some spots like right around the Green River complex in Wyoming. There's 2 different fossil dig sites that you can go, again, where you pay a fee and you can go dig and you can keep what you find. And they specialize over there. They've got a lot of fish and stingrays, but they've even found alligators, turtles. They found all kinds of dinosaur, partial dinosaurs and stuff like that. So if you're ever looking for fun family activities, or even if it's just you and your lady or whatever, that's just a great way to spend a couple of days, is go out and do some digging and start to find what's inside the earth. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's one thing too with like herping. Like, I've never found an arrowhead, and I know there's a lot of arrowheads in the state. I just don't exactly know where I'm looking, and even geodes. A lot of the herpers in Missouri are always finding these really amazing looking geodes, and I don't have the eye for it yet. It seems like a simple thing, but I haven't figured it out while I'm out there hiking for miles.
Yeah, you got to get nerdy, man. You got to go to the shows and like talk to the old timers, and you go online and just poke around to some of these forums, these rock forums. There's some that are on Facebook. There's some rock forums, geology and minerals. And once you start researching, you can go down the rabbit hole. It's really cool though.
I believe
over
it.
the years, I've bought a lot of fossils, and I tend to gravitate towards reptile fossils. Shocking, but so I've got Discosaurus Discosaurus. It's a mouthful. I got like 3 of those now that are from Serbia, and I got them through a German dealer, and they basically look like a cross between a salamander and a lizard that's like over a foot long. Total, all the arms and legs totally preserved. I think I threw a picture of one of those up on IG as well. Trilobites is another thing. Basically, if you think of like a pill bug, or everybody's into these little
Isopods.
help me out.
Isopods, yeah.
Yeah, isopods, exactly.
Don't
Just think of an isopod on steroids, like that big, Yeah, there you go. That's the Discosaurus that I'm sorry, it's found in the Czech Republic. I've got 3 of those, so those are hard to find, hard to come by. There's another one that's bigger than that. That's like 2 feet long. I still haven't been able to come across one of those that I could afford, but that's fun stuff.
No, for sure. Yeah, like I said, there's no shortage of hobbies in the world, and all my hobbies are extremely expensive, whether it's playing hockey, going fishing, or the reptile thing. Just about everything I do is an arm and a leg when it comes to a hobby. Not as bad as that, though. I mean, I know how those numbers can be. And I think I saw a post out in Arkansas, it must have been this past year, where it showed a guy that found this giant, what looked like a geode, and I think he was laying next to it, and I think they appraised it at like $2 or $4 million.
Yeah.
I gotta look that link up. I don't think it'd be that hard. I think I sent it to somebody I don't send a lot of messages to, so I'll see if I can find that one for you. But it was pretty unique.
There was one. It was a very large crystal that was found in Arkansas, and it was valued at $4 million. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. And yeah, all those guys down there in Hot Springs, Mount Ida, all that area, all those miners kind of know each other. So you got what is it? Twin Creeks mine. You got Ron Coleman mines. You got Wagner and Avon. All 4 of those are kind of prominent in that area for being like dig sites that you can go as just a regular Joe citizen and go down there with a pick and a shovel and start figuring it out. Another guy I like watching on YouTube is the Crystal Collector, and he's got a YouTube channel, and he goes after a lot of the amethyst, and but he travels around the world and does mining and kind of teaches people what you can do out there. It's like I said, it's kind of my second hobby after reptiles. So all the
really
rocks.
Cool. So not to interrupt you, but Ben's giving off a very serial killer look right now. You okay over there, man? You might want to bring that light down a little bit. You look all squinty-eyed and crazy.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's not good either.
Yeah, I don't normally.
Can we get someone in the middle?
I'm trying to look up some stuff as you guys are talking about this stuff, just see if I can find.
That's fine. Is it related to Jason, or are you out on your own tangent now? Have we lost you?
No. So I enjoy rocks as well, but I never really got super into them. I was in South Africa once, and they were selling for dirt cheap, like tiger's eye and like big stones. The exchange rate was really good in my favor, and I bought a handful, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I always like it. I just never really delve into it. I would like to do it one day, but
okay. So for anybody listening, if you want to get totally hooked and addicted to rocks, here's what you got to do. Look up the Tucson Gem Show in Arizona, and it happens every year around January, February. It goes for about 15 days to 3 weeks, and it's thousands of vendors from around all over the world come to Tucson, Arizona, and they sell rocks, fossils, crystals, minerals, and it's insane. It's like a rock shop on a gazillion steroids. Just huge. It's the biggest rock show in the world, and it's right in our backyard, and so many people don't even know about it. I'm into rocks, and I only found out about it like 3 years ago, and we went down there as a family, and of course spent a way too much money, but it was so fun. It was just incredible. Like one of my favorite things there at the show was the dinosaurs and the fossil exhibit, and it was better than any museum I've ever been to. Just full of dinosaurs that, fish that are like 10 feet long that have a beak, Dunkleosteus, if you've ever heard of that. Like it looked like it could just chop you up in the water, like stuff like that. And there was some kind of I forget the name of the bird, but I had my son stand next to the bird. The bird, it was really a reptile, right? It was like a pterodactyl or something, but it had these wings that were kind of modified feet that looked like something out of like one of those alien movies. And from the size of the bill, you could tell that thing could eat a man, and it had a wingspan probably of 40 feet. And so, and this is a real live thing that used to live on our planet. It's just crazy when you see the bones and you see it all constructed there. You're like, that thing used to fly around here, so I just love that stuff. I get all nerded out by it. Book yourself a ticket. Do yourself a favor. Go down and check out the Tucson Gem Show because you'll be amazed.
This year it's January 30th to February 14th.
Yeah,
there you go.
I mean, and actually, it's kind of a perfect time of the year to be in Arizona when it comes to herping too, because you're not blazing hot temperatures. I'm sure I got to double check, but I bet you a lot of things are maybe coming out of the dens around that time of the year in Arizona, so that could be a pretty good road trip. But
and you got the Desert Museum out there with Bob Ashley runs the Tinley show. He has his Desert Museum down there right on the border, New Mexico and Arizona. It's a great spot. So
sounds like a road trip to me. So I did I used to drive from like Buffalo to LA 2 times a year for the Pomona show for about 3 straight years. And I think me and Josh Roberts were on it one year. And we stopped at this roadside attraction, and it had a big sign that said "Feed Ostriches," and it was "Feed Ostriches and Fossils." So we get there, and it's like a little shack, like the biggest shithole you've ever seen in your entire life. You go in it, and it's like wall-to-wall fossils, like teeth, bones, skulls, like all kinds of crazy stuff, and you wouldn't even imagine it. Like the most random thing in the world. I think some of this stuff was like $10,000 to $25,000, and honestly, you could probably take one of the panels off the outside of this building and break in like 2 seconds. Like it was a fucking shack, and he probably had no less than maybe $500,000 worth of shit in there. But it was just like random ass thing on the side of the road. Couldn't even tell you what state we were in now that I think about it, but I was there for the ostriches, but I loved everything else.
Yeah.
Lots of
you guys might both.
Oh.
You might both be closet rock guys. I'm gonna have to go plug in my laptop because it says it's gonna die here. So take a little walk with me.
It's up to you. I mean, if you want, we could say we peaked.
Yeah, we're off of reptiles right now, talking about.
That's a cool print.
There's my Abronia poster in the background. Here,
let
me give you.
That is cool.
Shot. Put my hand by that.
That's huge.
I had just a photograph that we blew up, stuck on the wall. All right.
Well, we made him go through all that trouble, and he had no idea what peaking means, so we're probably going to continue on for a little bit longer. Okay, so let's see how this goes. I want to kind of jump back to the beginning a little bit, and I want to talk about your trips to Mexico. Are you always going with the same group of guys? Is it your one guy with occasionally somebody else? Have you had any issues at the borders down there? Like any chaos factor? Like, tell me a little bit more about Mexico. No, just real perfect, easy trips, standard vacations.
So I do take my family down there a lot on vacation, but we go down. We usually fly to Cancun. And then from there, we rent a car and drive as far south as we can take it. So I like to go to a little fishing village called Xcalac, which is almost on the border of Belize. And there's almost nobody down there. The coral reefs are really pristine there. And you can see a lot of variety. And like one of my favorite fish to see in the ocean is queen angelfish. And and they're down there. You see them every day there. The last time we went there, we had crystal clear water, that you could see 100 feet, and we ended up swimming with manatees, which was really cool. I never would have even guessed that was something that I would want to do, but after now having done that, I would say that's a really fun thing to do too. So I just try to get out there and see, all kinds of different aspects of wildlife. So I don't limit myself just to the reptiles, So so the fish, and there are sea turtles out there too, but it's always amazing to see the variety of stuff that's in the ocean. And I like to get away from the people, So my strike is weird, but maybe I'm not a people person, I guess. But I love it down there. I love Mexico, and it probably helps that I speak Spanish because I'm pretty comfortable going to a market and picking out things, whatever I want to, to eat. And but as far as the lizard trips, that's a whole different thing, right? I usually just go by myself, and I'll meet Roberto, I'll meet Rafa, or any number of folks down there. There's been several guys that I've gotten to know over the years, and we usually kind of plan out different locations and species that we're trying to see, and that's what we ended up. Over the years, I've gone. I usually fly into Mexico City, rent a car, and get a horrendous headache driving out of there because of the smog and the traffic and the Mexican driving experience is very stressful.
It's exciting.
It got a lot better when the GPS on my phone started working, because we used to go down there and I used to have to buy a special TomTom GPS that had the Mexican maps, right? And it was always a nightmare if that thing went out on you. Like all of a sudden you're in the middle of Mexico, not knowing where to go, and you're looking at maps, and the maps don't have the signs, and especially at night, like you can't see the signs anyway. And just the crazy driving, it's insane. Sometimes you get trucks passing other trucks coming up both sides of the lane. You're like, well, where am I supposed to go? You're supposed to use the shoulder, apparently. So yeah, that stuff happens, and that's real life down there. The last trip that I went on, and I will say this, in the last 6-7 years, it's gotten more and more dangerous in a lot of the areas that we used to go to for the highlands. There's been, the drug trade and the narcos and everything controlling different areas. And if they think you've got money, they can kidnap you on certain areas, Sometimes they run everything. So for those reasons, I don't take my family down there. But usually I feel very safe, though, because I'm down there with guys that know the area. And there was one time I remember, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we went to this one area that was it was where Abronia Martin de Campo is found, and it was just outside of Guerrero, and there was a logging dispute. The locals were cutting down trees illegally, and the law enforcement had come in and tried to make some arrests, and ended up getting run out and shot at. And then they pretty much said, yeah, don't anybody go in there, right? So we didn't know all that, and we went in there. And so we were in this area where there was all this stuff going on, and we started asking some of the locals about, showing them pictures of the lizards and had they seen them. And they're like, what are you guys doing here? You should not be in this area. They're going to think that you're spies, law enforcement coming in under and so we actually had to leave. But yeah, that was kind of the worst. I didn't have anything crazy happen to me. One of my buddies, though, did get robbed at gunpoint, and so that does happen down there. Sometimes they'll drop a tree in the middle of the road, right? And if you're coming up in your little rental car, there's really not much for you to do except just get robbed. So you just try to go along with it and not get shot. So that stuff does happen in Mexico occasionally, especially if you're getting off the beaten path and away from the kind of the tourist zones.
And I don't want to scare anybody and make it seem like it's a horrible place. It's not, but that is part of the reality, right? So,
Well, any country you go to, even people who visit the United States, when the Australians come here, we tell them certain areas they probably shouldn't go hang out in. I mean, that's the reality of things.
Yeah.
But so your goal, not only just because you love going down there, but is the goal to see all 29 species and maybe come across something new someday? Or is it usually all just have to do with what your buddies want to do?
I mean, it's changed over the years. Initially, it was just I wanted to observe multiple species out in the wild and get some good photographs. And you know, we were trying to at that time to set up the UMA projects and establish captive breeding colonies and all that stuff. So, and we were trying to make contacts in those areas and really get a feel for what was the population of the animals. Was it healthy and durable, and what kind of pressures were they facing? And honestly, what we found was with almost all the Abronia species, the main pressure that they face is habitat destruction right at the very top. It's just a matter of they live in these old growth oak forests that are getting wiped out and replaced with cornfields and cattle, and you know, people putting in housing developments and stuff like that. And of course, anytime there's people, the things that come along with that are cats, feral cats, lots of cats out there killing lizards. So I think those two things, habitat loss and the feral cats, have really taken a toll on Abronia in particular. And then probably in third place, I would say, is just the local population in general. You know, a lot of the locals felt like they're venomous animals, they're dangerous, and they just need to kill them on sight. And so anytime they would find them, they would just kill them. You know, so when you have kind of the human settlements kind of creeping in with where the animals are, you're going to just find less and less animals in those areas. And we would find, in particular, one of the customs in Chiapas was they would pull down the Spanish moss, the hanging moss, and all the bromeliads. So pretty much, if you could get a ladder up 20 feet into a tree, they would take all that stuff down, right? They'd all go out and get that, and it was for Christmas. It was like Christmas decorations. So they're pulling down the bromeliads and the Spanish moss, and they'd fill up truckloads of this stuff, and then they'd take it to the markets and sell it. Well, in that stuff, they're always finding Abronia, and they kill it on sight, right? So not only are they destroying the habitat, they're also just killing the animals. So that was happening, you know, by the hundreds and probably thousands for many years. Just following those local traditions. And Roberto has done what he could, you know, to try and re-educate some of the thinking about that and leave the animals and let them have their space. And but then somewhere down there in like fifth place, I would say, is the actual poaching of animals, right? People collecting them to ship them and sell them. And it does frustrate me when I see, you know, large buckets of lizards where there's like 30 animals in a bucket, and there's mixed sizes, and there's males and females and babies in there. And I'm just like, come on, guys, you can do better than that. You know, it's there's so many different ways to manage that piece of it if you're going to do that. And you've got the UMA system that's right there that you could use if you were willing to take the long game, you know, and do the permits and all that. But it's just so easy to collect animals like that and then send them to a distributor, and then the guy gets them up somehow across the border. So that has happened on a smaller scale, but I don't think that is, in my opinion, and just in all the years of traveling around and seeing animals in the wild and seeing the habitat, and it's just my experience that, you know, the number of animals that have been exported out illegally, we'll say, I don't think that's truly destructive to the population, not to the degree that the other four things are that I mentioned, you know. So, and I also, it's just my opinion again, but I think there is value having the animals in a captive population. because we start to understand them, how to care for them, how to maintain, how to produce multiple generations. And we've done all those things now as a group. And there's guys that I know in Europe, and there's guys here in the United States who have produced animals over multiple generations and been successful and have figured out the protocols. And that's valuable to everyone involved, because it takes pressure off of the poaching, and it takes, it gets those animals kind of established in what we could call a captive assurance colony, right outside of their native habitat. So if the fire wipes out the entire small range of that particular Abronia, at least we've got some here, that have been protected and could actually be used to reintroduce someday. So I see value in all those things. So I don't necessarily look at the movement of animals as such a horrible thing like some people might.
Oh, I understand it. There's always different sides to it, and different arguments, and it's really hard to convince people otherwise sometimes, because when people hear about reptile breeders and so on and so forth, they always look at it as something where there's a profit in it. And don't get me wrong, it's not like you can't make money doing this, but a lot more people don't make money doing it. There's people like you that do it just because you really want to do it. You got a passion for it. So, really nothing you can do about certain opinions, and that's it.
Yeah.
But, well, Jason, I hate to do this, but I watched Benjamin fall asleep about 30 seconds ago.
What?
So
I didn't fall asleep.
Yeah, but no, honestly, we do have to cut it. I hate it. Since it's small, it's a short week for both me and Benjamin. We're going to be on the road heading down to Arlington in about 2 days. Lots of preparations with our animals and everything else in the process. So where I could talk to you for hours. 2 hours is about all you get it out of us tonight, buddy.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure visiting with you guys. I really appreciate the invite, Dave. And Benjamin, it's great to meet you now.
Yep.
For the second time. This time I feel like we're properly getting to know each other. I think in the show we just kind of pass each other. But thank you so much, guys. It was really fun talking to you. Hopefully, we shared some information about it, at least on the Abronia side, that people can use, to improve their captive husbandry and whatnot. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great. I had fun and I learned a lot. And I thought that I wouldn't have as much to talk about in this episode, but I really, I enjoy Abronia and Egernia and things like that, so I'm into that. So it was good. It was good.
Yeah, we'll
keep an eye on boas.
We can dive deeper on Egernia at another time if you want. I got a lot more stuff on those. So.
Oh, for sure. Great. Well, we'll definitely be doing this again, and if me and Benjamin are both down there at the same time at some point, get together, have more hands-on, talk about some of the animals and projects, of course. But yeah, Benjamin, you sweet, get us out of here, man. You got that magical voice at the end, and you know all the links and shit.
All right, well, thank you, Jason Wagner, for being on, and we really appreciate it. We had a great time, and we hope that everybody else enjoyed it as well. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Make sure you download the episodes if you're on any other platform, really, if you're just listening. We appreciate everybody and, giving us a chance to share some more information. And I hope everybody has a good night. Thank you, Jason, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye, guys.